Brandon, Michael, and Timothy. Three friends, bound by years of laughter and shared dreams. Countless nights over video games, fueled by cheap beer. They yearned for a space where their camaraderie could flourish. Michael found a spacious four-bedroom house in Mendon, Michigan. A sprawling kitchen, perfect living room, and a two-car garage. For them, this house felt like a palace. It was the embodiment of their shared aspirations. The decision to move in together was unanimous. They knew just the place, IKEA. Little did they know their quest would soon morph into a terrifying fight for survival. The house in Mendon was more than just a dwelling. It was a symbol of their collective ambition. Located a stone's throw from Michael's workplace, it represented stability. Michael, recently promoted, had secured the means to make their dream a reality. He promised Brandon and Timothy jobs, a gesture of friendship and faith. The house was a testament to a bygone era, built to last. Wooden floors creaked with memories yet to be made, sunlight streaming in. A sense of history invited them to add their own chapter. When it came to furnishing their new abode, the friends unanimously agreed on IKEA. The Swedish furniture giant held an almost mythical allure, promising stylish yet affordable furniture that perfectly captured the spirit of their youthful optimism. They spent hours browsing the IKEA website, creating shared wish lists, and debating the merits of various shades of throw pillows. Each item they selected felt imbued with the promise of the life they were building together, a tangible representation of their shared dreams. Brandon volunteered to tackle the IKEA expedition, eager to escape the bittersweet task of packing up his old apartment. He envisioned himself navigating the labyrinthine aisles with the precision of a seasoned explorer, emerging triumphant with a truckload of flat-packed treasures. Little did he know that this seemingly mundane errand would soon spiral into a terrifying ordeal, trapping him in a nightmare far more insidious than any piece of unassembled furniture. Armed with a meticulously crafted shopping list and an almost childlike sense of excitement, Brandon set off for his local IKEA. He hummed along to the radio, his heart filled with anticipation for the new chapter that awaited him and his friends. As he pulled into the sprawling IKEA parking lot, it never occurred to him that this might be the last taste of normalcy he would experience for a very long time. The moment Brandon stepped foot inside IKEA, a strange sense of unease washed over him. It wasn't anything he could quite put his finger on. It was more of a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a prickling sensation at the back of his neck. He brushed it off as pre-move jitters, attributing his unease to the overwhelming vastness of the IKEA showroom. He efficiently navigated the maze of showrooms, his shopping cart filling up with everything from sleek Scandinavian sofas to minimalist coffee tables. With each successful item crossed off his list, Brandon felt a surge of accomplishment. He was on a roll, a one-man furniture acquiring machine. As he made his way through the maze of showrooms, Brandon stumbled upon a section dedicated to gaming chairs. A mischievous grin spread across his face. He knew Michael and Timothy had been eyeing these chairs for weeks, but they had deemed them an unnecessary extravagance. Brandon, however, saw this as the perfect opportunity to surprise his friends, a testament to their shared love of video games and his understanding of their unspoken desires. Brandon veered off his planned route, venturing deeper into the heart of the IKEA labyrinth. He chuckled, imagining Michael and Timothy's surprise at the gaming chairs, yet he couldn't shake off the feeling that he was being watched. A shiver ran down his spine as he noticed a lone figure at the end of an aisle. Shaking off his apprehension, Brandon pushed his cart forward, heart pounding. Little did he know, his quest was about to lead him down a far more sinister path. Hours melted away as Brandon scoured the seemingly endless aisles of IKEA, his quest for the perfect gaming chairs turning into an increasingly frustrating endeavor. He had traversed the entirety of the showroom floor multiple times, his internal compass spinning uselessly as he found himself backtracking, each turn leading him not closer to his goal but deeper into a disorienting maze of identical-looking furniture displays. The once familiar layout of the store now seemed fluid, shifting and rearranging itself like a living organism designed to trap unsuspecting shoppers within its brightly lit bowels. Doubt gnawed at the edges of Brandon's mind. Had he taken a wrong turn somewhere? Missed a crucial sign indicating the location of the elusive gaming chairs? Or was there something more sinister at play? A deliberate manipulation of the store's layout designed to disorient and confuse. A wave of exhaustion washed over him, a mixture of physical fatigue from pushing the heavy cart and a growing mental weariness brought on by the seemingly endless rows of identical furniture. He longed to consult his phone, to lose himself in the mindless scroll of social media. But the battery had died hours ago, leaving him tethered to the present, trapped in a reality that felt increasingly surreal. The once comforting background noise of the store had faded, replaced by an unsettling silence punctuated only by the squeak of his sneakers against the polished concrete floor. He was alone, adrift in a sea of furniture, the walls closing in, the ceiling pressing down, the air thick with an unspoken menace that sent shivers down his spine. Brandon's initial amusement at the absurdity of his situation slowly morphed into a chilling realization. He was trapped. The once comforting familiarity of the IKEA showroom now felt oppressive, the endless rows of furniture morphing into menacing barriers. Every turn he took led him not to an exit but deeper into the heart of the labyrinth. Panic gnawed at the edges of his composure, a rising tide of fear threatening to overwhelm his rational mind. He tried to retrace his steps, but the details were already fading, replaced by a growing sense of disorientation. The playful blue and yellow color scheme of the store now felt garish, almost sinister. He reached for his phone, but the screen remained stubbornly dark, the battery long drained. Time, once a comforting constant, now stretched and distorted, each passing minute feeling like an eternity. How long had he been wandering these aisles? Hours, days. The very notion of time seemed to lose all meaning within the confines of this endless store. The last vestiges of daylight faded, the once bright fluorescent lights overhead flickering and dimming, casting long, eerie shadows. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping with an almost unnatural swiftness, sending a fresh wave of fear coursing through him. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and for the first time since entering the store, Brandon allowed himself to acknowledge the terrifying possibility that he might never escape. As darkness enveloped the IKEA, swallowing the last vestiges of daylight, Brandon found himself standing in an eerie silence. The once familiar sounds of shoppers browsing, carts clattering, and children giggling had vanished, leaving behind an unnerving quietude that amplified the pounding of his own heart. He was alone, utterly alone, in a vast expanse of furniture and shadows. He strained his ears, listening for any sign of life, any indication that he was not the only living soul trapped within this retail purgatory. But there was nothing, only the sound of his own ragged breathing and the distant hum of the building's electrical system, a constant, low-frequency thrum that seemed to vibrate deep within his bones. A wave of dizziness washed over him, his legs feeling weak and unsteady beneath him. He leaned heavily against a nearby bookcase, its smooth, laminated surface cold against his cheek. Fear, raw and primal, surged through him, threatening to consume him entirely. He had to escape, had to find a way out of this nightmare, but where could he go? Who could he turn to for help? As he stood there, paralyzed by fear and indecision, a faint sound reached his ears, a sound that sent a fresh wave of terror coursing through his veins. It was a slow, deliberate dragging sound, accompanied by a rhythmic thumping, like something heavy being dragged across the concrete floor. It was coming from somewhere deep within the bowels of the store, drawing closer with each passing second. The dragging sound grew louder, closer, echoing through the deserted aisles of the IKEA labyrinth. Brandon's breath caught in his throat, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. He scanned his surroundings, his eyes desperately searching for a place to hide, a weapon to defend himself, anything to offer a semblance of safety in the face of the unknown. He considered making a run for it, sprinting blindly through the maze of furniture in the hopes of outrunning whatever was approaching. But his legs felt like lead weights, his body heavy with exhaustion and fear. Besides, where could he possibly run to in this endless expanse of showrooms and aisles? He was trapped, a cornered animal awaiting its fate. His gaze fell upon a nearby display, a cozy-looking bedroom set complete with a plush rug, a nightstand, and a wardrobe with its doors slightly ajar. It wasn't much, but it offered a sliver of concealment. a momentary reprieve from the unseen terror that stalked him through the darkened store. With a surge of adrenaline, he lunged towards the wardrobe, his hand trembling as he reached for the handle. As he pulled open the door, a wave of stale air washed over him, carrying with it the faint scent of mothballs and forgotten dreams. He hesitated for a moment, his mind screaming at him to run, to keep moving, but the dragging sound was getting closer and he knew he had no other choice. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside the wardrobe, pulling the door shut behind him, plunging himself into suffocating darkness. Enclosed in the stifling darkness of the wardrobe, Brandon pressed his back against the cold, hardboard backing, his chest heaving. The dragging sound was closer now, right outside the bedroom set, accompanied by a low, guttural rasp that sent shivers down his spine. Suddenly, the wardrobe door was flung open, bathing him in a blinding light. Standing in the doorway were three figures, their bodies clad in the familiar blue and yellow uniforms of IKEA employees, but their eyes gleamed with a cold, predatory hunger. Brandon stared back at the figures, his body frozen in place by a mixture of terror and disbelief. One of the figures, the tallest of the three, took a slow, deliberate step towards him, its movements jerky and unnatural. He wanted to scream, to run, but his body refused to obey. The figure took another step closer, its shadow stretching out across the floor, reaching for him like a grasping hand. But the attack never came. Instead, a high-pitched whine pierced the silence, and the figures in the doorway froze, their heads snapping up. Brandon seized the opportunity, scrambling out of the wardrobe, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. The figures remained fixated on the approaching light, which was now close enough for Brandon to make out the distinct outline of a forklift. Adrenaline surged through Brandon's veins, propelling him forward. He didn't waste time looking back, just ran, his lungs burning, his legs screaming in protest. The forklift rumbled past, its operator oblivious to his presence, its bright lights momentarily illuminating the deserted aisles. Brandon dodged and weaved through the maze of display beds, kitchen islands, and towering bookshelves, his breath catching in his throat. Driven by fear, Brandon ducked behind a towering display of bathroom vanities, his chest heaving. He peeked cautiously through the artificial ferns, his heart pounding in his ears. Then he saw it. A narrow doorway marked employees only, partially obscured by a stack of discounted picture frames. With a surge of adrenaline, Brandon bolted from his hiding place, his sneakers squeaking against the polished concrete floor. Brandon squeezed through the narrow doorway, his heart pounding against his ribs. He found himself in a narrow hallway, its walls lined with shelves stacked high with boxes, spare parts, and discarded display items. He leaned against the wall, his chest heaving, his body trembling with exhaustion and relief. He had escaped, at least for now, but a chilling thought wormed its way into his mind. What if there was no way out? The silence in the hallway was unnerving, broken only by the sound of Brandon's own ragged breathing. He pushed himself off the wall, his hand trailing along the rough surface, his fingers encountering a scattering of cold, metallic bumps. The dragging sound returned, closer this time, accompanied by a low, guttural rasp. He spun around, his heart pounding in his chest, his eyes desperately searching the darkened hallway for the source of the sound. He ran, his sneakers pounding against the concrete floor, the sound of his own footsteps echoing loudly. He skidded to a halt in front of a door marked emergency exit, a surge of hope coursing through him. He fumbled for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked. At the far end of the hallway, partially obscured by a stack of overturned shopping carts, lay a crumpled heap, a body clad in the familiar blue and yellow uniform of an IKEA employee. The dragging sound was getting closer. accompanied by the sickening crunch of bone against concrete. Brandon knew he had to make a decision, had to act fast if he wanted to survive. He glanced back at the locked emergency exit, then at the gruesome scene at the end of the hallway. Suddenly, a voice, raspy and low, echoed through the hallway. "He's here." Brandon sank to his knees, his back against the cold, unforgiving metal of the emergency exit door. Tears streamed down his face, hot and salty against his lips. "Please," he whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. "Someone, anyone, help me." It was a desperate plea, uttered into the cold, uncaring void, a prayer whispered to a God he no longer believed in. But then, a sound cut through the darkness, a sound so unexpected, so out of place in this symphony of terror that it stopped Brandon's heart for a beat. It was a cough, a human cough. Brandon's eyes flew open, his gaze darting around the hallway, searching for the source of the sound. Then a voice, low and hesitant, spoke from the shadows. "Who's there?" "I'm Brandon," he said, his voice still shaky but gaining strength with each word. "I'm trapped in here." The figure stepped forward, emerging from the shadows into the pale light of the flickering fluorescent bulb. It was a woman, her face etched with exhaustion and fear, her clothes torn and stained. She looked at Brandon, her eyes wide with a mixture of suspicion and cautious hope. "Trapped?" she repeated, her voice a dry rasp. "You're new here, aren't you?" Brandon nodded, his throat suddenly tight. I came here for furniture. I got lost, and then..." He trailed off, unable to articulate the horrors he had witnessed, the terror that still clung to him like a second skin. The woman nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on Brandon's face, as if reading the fear and confusion etched there. "It's okay," she said softly. "You're safe now. We're safe here." She gestured towards the darkness behind her, and Brandon realized that there were others there, more figures emerging from the shadows, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes reflecting the same mixture of hope and despair that he felt in his own heart. They were a motley crew, these survivors of the Endless IKEA. Men and women, young and old, all united by their shared ordeal, their desperate hope of escape. They welcomed Brandon into their fold with a mixture of wary curiosity and weary acceptance. They had seen too many newcomers arrive, their eyes bright with hope, only to watch that hope slowly extinguished by the relentless horrors of this place. They led him down a maze of corridors and back rooms, through hidden passages and behind false walls, until they reached their sanctuary, a makeshift camp hidden deep within the bowels of the store. It wasn't much, just a collection of blankets and sleeping bags spread out on the floor of a cavernous storage room, illuminated by a single, flickering fluorescent light. But it was a haven, a place of relative safety in this retail hellscape. Section 5, 20 Years Lost. As Brandon settled into the rhythm of life in the camp, listening to the whispered conversations and the hushed tales of survival, he began to piece together the horrifying truth of the Endless IKEA. There was no escape, not in the traditional sense. The store was a labyrinth, its layout constantly shifting, its exits sealed, its windows nothing more than painted illusions. Some of the survivors had been trapped here for years, others for decades. One old man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles and despair, claimed to have been here for over 20 years, his memories of the outside world fading like old photographs. He spoke of a life before the IKEA, a life filled with family, friends, and purpose, a life that now seemed as distant and unreal as a storybook fable. Section 6. The Rules of the Endless IKEA. The survivors had learned to adapt, to survive, to navigate the twisted logic of this place. They had learned the rules, the unwritten laws that governed their existence in this retail purgatory. Stay out of sight during the day when the store was at its most dangerous, when the staff patrolled the aisles, their blue and yellow uniforms a mockery of normalcy, their faces forever frozen in grotesque parodies of customer service smiles. Move only at night, when the shadows offered some measure of concealment When the store fell silent, the silence broken only by the distant hum of the electrical system and the occasional blood-curdling scream of the unwary. Trust no one? Not completely. The Endless IKEA had a way of warping the mind, of twisting even the most rational thoughts into paranoid delusions. Friendship was a precious commodity in this place, but it was a commodity that could be easily lost, shattered by the constant pressure, the ever-present fear. Section 7. Whispers of Madness. Brandon listened to these tales, his mind struggling to reconcile the mundane familiarity of his surroundings with the horrifying reality of his situation. He had always thought of IKEA as a place of comfort, a place where he could lose himself in the aisles, surrounded by the promise of domestic bliss. Now the very sight of those familiar blue and yellow colors filled him with a sense of dread, a primal fear that sent shivers down his spine. He tried to cling to his sanity, to hold on to the memories of his old life, but the Endless IKEA had a way of chipping away at the edges of his mind, of blurring the lines between reality and nightmare. He found himself staring at the seemingly endless rows of identical furniture, his mind playing tricks on him, the patterns shifting and swirling, the objects themselves seeming to pulsate with a life of their own. He would catch snippets of conversations, whispers of madness and despair from the other survivors. They spoke of seeing things, hearing things, things that couldn't possibly be real, things that lurked in the shadows, things that whispered their names in the darkness, things that promised escape, only to lead them further into the heart of the labyrinth. At night, when the lights flickered and died, plunging the camp into darkness, the nightmares would begin. Brandon would toss and turn on his makeshift bed, his mind conjuring up images of the staff, their blank faces leering at him, their cold, dead eyes boring into his soul. He would hear the dragging sound echoing through his dreams, the sound of his own heartbeat drumming in his ears, a frantic, desperate rhythm that mirrored the terror that gripped his heart. He would wake up in a cold sweat, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his body trembling uncontrollably. He would look around the darkened camp, his eyes struggling to adjust to the shadows, his mind still caught between the horrors of his dreams and the equally terrifying reality of his situation. He was trapped in the Endless IKEA, a prisoner in a retail purgatory, his hopes and dreams slowly fading like the light from a dying star. And as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, he began to realize that the true horror of this place wasn't the staff, or the labyrinthine layout, or even the constant threat of death. It was the slow, insidious erosion of hope. Time, once a reliable measure of days and nights, blurred into a meaningless cycle within the suffocating embrace of the Endless IKEA. The initial shock of Brandon's predicament, the raw terror of his first encounters with the staff, had dulled into a constant, low-grade dread. He was no longer the same man who had entered the store, his heart set on surprising his friends with new gaming chairs. The Endless IKEA had a way of stripping away such frivolous concerns, replacing them with a primal need for survival, a gnawing hunger for escape. He watched as fellow survivors, their faces etched with hope when he first arrived, succumbed to despair. Some retreated into themselves, their eyes vacant, their words nonsensical, lost in the labyrinthine corridors of their own minds. Others lashed out, their anger fueled by the hopelessness of their situation, their rage directed at the unseen forces that held them captive. Brandon witnessed fights erupt over scraps of food, over a coveted sleeping bag, over a sliver of hope that flickered and died like a candle in the wind. He tried to hold on to his own sanity, to cling to the memories of his old life. But the Endless IKEA had a way of seeping into the cracks of his mind, blurring the lines between reality and nightmare. He would find himself staring at the endless rows of furniture, his vision swimming, the patterns swirling, the objects themselves seeming to mock him with their normalcy, their utter indifference to his plight. There were times, fleeting and precious, when a glimmer of hope would pierce the oppressive darkness. Rumors would spread through the camp, whispers of a hidden exit, a secret passage, a way out of this retail hell. Brandon would feel his heart quicken, his pulse race, a surge of adrenaline momentarily banishing the pervasive sense of despair. He would find himself clinging to these rumors, allowing himself to believe, to hope, against all reason, that this time it might be true. But each time the hope would prove false. The rumors nothing more than cruel jokes played by the Endless IKEA itself, or perhaps by the increasingly fragile minds of its prisoners. The hidden exit would turn out to be a dead end, a wall cleverly disguised as a doorway. The secret passage would lead to another section of the store, identical to the last, the same endless aisles of furniture, the same suffocating sense of futility. And with each shattered hope, Brandon felt a part of himself die, a slow, agonizing death of the spirit. Five years. 5 years had passed since Brandon had last felt the warmth of the sun on his skin, had last tasted the freedom of the world outside the Endless IKEA. 5 years of fear, of loss, of the slow, agonizing erosion of hope. He had witnessed things that would forever haunt his dreams, had lost friends to both the staff and to the despair that permeated this place. Yet amidst the darkness, a single light remained. His name was Norman, a young boy, no more than 8 years old, who had been trapped in the IKEA with his parents. They had been separated during their initial escape attempt, and Norman, miraculously, had found his way to the survivors' camp. He was a beacon of innocence in this bleak and unforgiving world, his laughter a rare and precious commodity, his spirit unbroken by the horrors he had witnessed. Brandon, hardened by years of survival, found himself drawn to the boy's unwavering optimism. Norman reminded him of a time before the IKEA, a time when the world was filled with wonder and possibility. He became a surrogate older brother to Norman, teaching him the ways of the store, sharing his meager rations, and clinging to the boy's unwavering belief that one day they would escape. One evening, as Brandon and Norman were huddled around a flickering candle, sharing a meager meal, a man stumbled into their camp. It was David, Norman's father. He had been searching for his son for weeks. Upon seeing Norman safe, David collapsed, sobbing. He clung to his son, afraid Norman would vanish. The reunion was bittersweet, tinged with fear and uncertainty. Days turned into weeks, and David's hope of finding his wife dwindled. He became withdrawn, his words often nonsensical. He would spend hours wandering the deserted aisles of the IKEA, searching for a sign. Brandon watched David's descent with growing concern. He knew what it was like to lose hope in this place. He had come to care for Norman, seeing a glimmer of his own lost innocence. He couldn't stand by and watch as both father and son succumbed to the darkness. One night, Brandon was awakened by a muffled sound. He sat up, heart pounding, reaching for the rusty pipe beneath his bed. He saw David kneeling, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. A single candle flickered nearby, casting long shadows. David pulled out a small silver locket. He held it tightly, lips moving in silent prayer. An idea, reckless and desperate, began to form in Brandon's mind. He had heard whispers of a ritual, a way to communicate with something within the IKEA. A being of immense power, they said, that could grant wishes for a price. Brandon knew such rumors were likely the product of shattered minds, but he also knew that David was on the verge of a complete breakdown. He decided to gamble. Brandon approached David cautiously, his hand still gripping the rusty pipe. He had no idea if this ritual, if it even existed, would work. He had no idea what the price might be, but he was willing to risk anything, even his own sanity, for the slim chance of saving Norman and his father. Brandon spent the next few days gathering the necessary components for the ritual, his movements furtive, his eyes constantly scanning his surroundings for any sign of the staff. The other survivors, their spirits broken by years of confinement, watched him with a mixture of apathy and morbid curiosity. They had seen such displays of desperate hope before, had witnessed firsthand the cruel indifference with which the Endless IKEA treated such pleas for salvation. The ritual, according to the whispers, had to be performed in a specific location, a place of power within the store. It was a children's play area, a brightly colored hellscape of plastic tunnels, ball pits, and padded floors. The irony of seeking salvation in a place designed for childhood innocence was not lost on Brandon, but he pushed aside his doubts, his determination fueled by a desperate hope. As he gathered the final components for the ritual, a child's drawing, a broken toy, a single white feather, he felt a chill run down his spine. The air in the play area was heavy, stagnant, as if the very walls themselves were holding their breath, watching him, waiting. The ritual itself was a blur of whispered words, strange symbols drawn on the floor with a piece of broken crayon, and the prickling sensation of unseen eyes watching his every move. As he performed the final gesture, a drop of his own blood smeared on the surface of the broken toy. A wave of dizziness washed over him. The air crackled with energy, and the shadows in the play area seemed to writhe and twist, taking on menacing shapes that danced just beyond the periphery of his vision. And then silence. Brandon waited, his heart pounding in his chest, his breath catching in his throat. Had it worked? Had he done enough? Or was this just another cruel trick played by the Endless IKEA? Another layer of madness peeling away from his already fragile sanity? Suddenly, a voice, low and guttural, seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves, vibrating through the air, resonating deep within Brandon's bones. "You seek to bargain?" Brandon swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. He had never believed in the rumors, had dismissed them as the ramblings of broken minds. But now, faced with the undeniable evidence of something beyond his comprehension, he couldn't deny the truth. "Yes," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "I seek a way out for the boy, Norman, and his father." The voice chuckled, a low rumble that seemed to shake the very foundations of the IKEA. A noble request, but all bargains come with a price. The details of the bargain, of the price that Brandon had to pay to secure the freedom of Norman and David, would forever remain seared into his memory. Some things, he knew, were best left unspoken, buried deep within the recesses of his mind. He watched as Norman and David stepped through the shimmering portal, their faces a mixture of disbelief and elation. He saw the relief in David's eyes, the way he clung to his son, and then they were gone. The portal flickered and died, leaving Brandon alone in the eerie silence of the children's play area. He had done it. He had saved them. But at what cost? He looked around at the brightly colored walls, the plastic toys scattered across the floor, and felt a chill run down his spine. The Endless IKEA remained, its grip on him unbroken. He was still trapped, a prisoner in this retail purgatory. As he turned to leave the play area, his gaze fell upon a small, hand-drawn picture lying on the floor. It was a picture of a house, with a bright yellow sun shining down from a cloudless sky. Beneath the picture, scrawled in crayon, were the words, "Thank you, Brandon." Brandon picked up the picture, his fingers tracing the lines of the child's drawing. A single tear rolled down his cheek. He had sacrificed everything for this moment. He tucked the picture into his pocket, a tangible reminder of the boy he had saved. And as he walked away from the children's play area, back into the labyrinthine heart of the Endless IKEA, he knew that he would never forget Norman. The Endless IKEA endures, its aisles stretching out before him. But somewhere, out there, a small boy was free, and for Brandon, that was enough. More years would pass after Brandon managed to get Norman and David out. Brandon was happy that for once in his life he did something good. Something that wasn't selfish for once. When he entered the Endless IKEA, he was 20 years old, but now he was days away from turning 37. Over the years, Brandon became more and more accustomed to the ways that the Endless IKEA worked. Every route, every aisle was burned into his mind. Brandon soon became the camp leader, with him helping any newcomers that came. Shortly after Brandon turned 40, he decided it was time. He passed the torch of leadership to a young man named Jared, a remarkable individual that caught his eye. That same night when everyone was asleep, Brandon left the camp. The doubts within Brandon's mind led him to tough decision. That staff would spot Brandon walking around and charge at him saying, "The store is now closed, please exit the building." He was prepared to die, but something caught his eye. A light, but not just any light. It was a door, a way out, the way out. Brandon, using what strength, had punched one of the staff as they got to him. He ran with all his might. With every step, he felt the years pushing down on his as he ran for the doorway. The staff were right behind him and gaining on him quickly, so he did the most logical thing he could. He tipped over a shelf to block them from chasing him. Just as he opened the door, one of the staff grabbed his foot. He grabbed the doorknob, not willing to let what might be his only chance to escape go. Brandon could feel the weight of the staff pulling foot. Thinking quickly, Brandon pulled out a knife from his pocket and threw it into the staff's face, killing it. The staff's grip was still tight around his ankle, so in a desperate act, he cuts off his own foot. Brandon would open the door and stumble outside the IKEA. The strange warmth of sun will beam down on him. Knowing that he was safe, Brandon's closes eyes sirens blaze in the background.